Hi, welcome everyone. This is the National Empowerment Center DEI webinar series, providing culturally competent support to people with facial difference, a FaceOut project webinar in honor of Sandy Goodwick, featuring presenters Felix Guzman, David Roach, and Sora Kasuga. And I'm Maureen Mullen, your moderator. A disclaimer, this webinar was developed in part under grant number SM062560 from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Closed captioning is available. Click on the CC or more to view closed captioning. You can also view the entire transcript of this meeting by clicking on Show Transcript. This webinar will be recorded. The recording will be posted to the National Empowerment website at https://powertoyou.org. If you do not wish to be seen on the recording, you are welcome to turn off your camera. At the end of the webinar, there will be a Q&A session. You are invited to ask questions at any time through the chat function. We will do our best to answer all questions. If we do not answer your questions, you are welcome to email us at info4@powertoyou.org, and we will do our best to get back to you. You are also welcome to make comments using the chat function. Felix Guzman is a poet, community organizer, and advocate, focusing on the issues at the intersectionality of poverty, including but not limited to decarceration, homelessness, and the overt disparity in provision of mental health and recovery services to the BIPOC community. Felix is not only facially different, but is also a certified peer professional in New York State, working towards obtaining professional practice. Due to his contributions to the community and the important conversations around community safety, Felix currently serves on the board of directors at various nonprofits and has also been appointed to public office as a member of the New York City City Council Commission on Community Reinvestment in the closure of Rikers Island. Having appeared in print, online, and televised media, Felix is looking to raise awareness on the issues that don't usually receive attention, let alone a platform. Felix plans to run for public office in the future as a facility different peer professional badass. David Roach is a pioneer of disability culture and inspirational humorist who has transformed the challenges and gifts of living with facial difference into a compelling message that has won standing ovations from New Zealand to Moscow, across Canada and the USA, including at the White House, the Kennedy Center, and the Sydney and Vancouver Olympics Arts Festivals. David recently was awarded the Order of Canada for making both Canada and the US a better place through his disability and facial difference-related activism. He is featured in Shameless, The Art of Disability, the iconic film from the National Film Board of Canada, directed by Bonnie Shear Klein. He also has a principal role in the feature film Happy Face, directed by Alexandra Franchi. David has published 2 books, The Church of 80% Sincerity and Standing at the Back Door of Happiness. He is active in the FaceOut project activism cohort begun by Sora Kasuga. Sora Kasuga is a writer, speaker, professional circus artist, and model, the founder of the FaceOut project. Proudly Japanese American, disabled, facially different, neurodivergent, and queer, Kasuga's many identities fuel their work to shift individual and collective perceptions in order to create a more inclusive, equitable, and just world. In a society built on shutting certain people out, Sora reaches for an inclusive humanity that emerges stronger because of our differences, not despite them. They have spoken at the United Nations, been featured on Today.com, and served on multiple panels on facial difference and disability. I'll now hand it over to our first speaker.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Mo. If you'll just give me a quick second, I'm going to share my screen. We'll get going. Before we get started, I would really love to just call everyone in and invite you to just do a little emotional check-in with yourself. Where are you right now, and how can you be present? Um, if you want, I invite you to take a few deep breaths, and then we'll start. Actually, I shared too quickly here. Um, we'd really love to kick off this webinar with our fabulous friend, fellow presenter, and incredible poet, Felix Guzman, who's going to share with you one of his poems.
Yes, a good day, all. So this poem before I recite it, it's called Brighter Burns My Light. So it's an affirmation piece. It's sort of a declaration of self and also to kind of affirm the divinity within oneself. And it's meant to actually be done in front of a mirror. So again, that's why it's an affirmation piece. And it's just about just exploring the virtues of self-belief and empowerment and kind of pushing forward despite everything to see the brighter part of the day on the other side of whatever struggles might be happening. So yes, so brighter burns my light. So that's brighter burns my light. So like S-O, not soul, but so. Brighter burns my light. So broken but not forgotten. Alive, I'm not a ghost of my past. Provided for as I need. I who have nothing, have as I asked. My yesterday's now a hella ways away from who I used to be. I believe you, merciful, loving, and blinds never argue with how you love me. Brighter burns my light so because of you, brighter burns my light so. Trace your steps through the darkness, I endeavor so always. Troubled but not wanting to refuse another their peace, away you sweep every tear before they stain the pillows of my cheek. I who have nothing, with the hell of old have made peace. Brighter burns my light so because of you, brighter burns my light so. What does it mean to be free? What does it mean to be free? Thank you. Poem. Yes. I'll
Thank you.
turn it back. So, yes.
Oh my gosh. I always feel so grateful and honored every time I get to hear you perform live. What a treat. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go back over here and share my screen. We'll get started. This webinar was catalyzed by Sandy Goodwick. Sandy was a devoted member of our activism cohort, and she was a fierce activist for social justice, mental health, facial difference, and disability as a whole, but really towards collective liberation. And one of the most enduring things about Sandy and part of her legacy is that she always wanted to make sure nobody was left out. She was talking about facial difference in the 70s. She was trying to include people with facial difference in the 70s, and this was something that a lot of people were not trying to do or even aware of. And she made it her life mission to build bridges between different movements, which is why we're here, because she reached out to the National Empowerment Center. And if I know Sandy, it probably went something like this. You need to do a webinar on facial difference, is what I think I imagined she said. And so that's how we got connected. And Kimberly and Oryx and everyone, Mo and Judine, have been so wonderful in bringing us here today. We're so grateful to the NEC. And I'd also like to thank the members of the FaceOut Project activism cohort for your eternal support and contributions to this webinar. The FaceOut Project is a grassroots effort to gather and empower the global facial difference community with the goal of securing basic human rights by eliminating stigma against facial difference. And in that effort, we also move towards collective liberation. We meet every Monday night for our activism cohort and have so far had members come in from 5 different countries, and we're growing. So today, this is what's on the agenda. We're going to talk about what is facial difference, stigma and media's role, empowerment, resilience, advocacy, tools for reducing stigma, and then we'll wrap up and give you some resources. We have a link to a page with a ton of resources that you'll be able to view. It's a Google document. And then at the end, we're here for questions, and I invite you to ask whatever is on your mind, even if you think it might be rude or off-putting. This is the place to ask questions, so please don't hold back because we're here to educate and happy to do so. I want to start with a question. Have you ever experienced facial difference or known someone who has? So I know there are some of you out there who live with facial difference on the daily. But if that's not you, maybe you had a pimple appear unexpectedly, or you accidentally hit your head and acquired a bruise or a cut on your face, or maybe you popped a blood vessel, which is kind of common. Or if you survived cancer, maybe you experienced temporary hair loss from chemotherapy. If any of this, or if none of this has ever happened, maybe you know someone like a teen who is going through acne, um, or a friend with either a permanent or temporary facial difference. As you think about this, just take a second to reflect. If you experience this yourself, what emotions and thoughts came up for you at the time? Or if you live with it, what experiences and emotions come up on the daily basis? And what happened when you went out in public? What was it like before? What was it like during? Just take a moment to reflect here. So what is facial difference? Right off the bat, I do want to acknowledge that we're keeping this largely in a US Canadian context because of the complexities with culture and vastly different lived experiences around the world due to like human rights or lack thereof and enforcement thereof. So today, US Canadian context. For those of you logging on, David, Felix, and I may be the first people you've ever connected with who are facially different. That might be because many, not all, people choose to self-isolate or try to cover up our difference because of the stigma we experience. And because of these things, the public is less exposed to people with facial difference. And all of this is a self-perpetuating cycle, and it leads to our further erasure and exclusion and the public's lack of understanding, which leads to violations of our human rights. And because community and connection almost always start in the face, the societal reaction to facially different people is often swift and brutal. But that said, I believe that we can change all of this. Anyone can acquire a facial difference at any time, and I'm going to walk you through the different ways that facial difference shows up. So there are 3 different types of facial difference. There's congenital, which means that you're born with it. That's like me. I have vascular malformations in my face. Oh, I didn't start with a visual description of myself. I'm so sorry. I'm a Japanese American person. My head is shaved mostly, and I have like a cascade of black curls kind of coming down over the left side of my forehead. I'm wearing an orange sweater, and behind me is a wood stove that is heating my house and keeping me warm, and a wood pile next to it. So going back to facial difference, I have vascular malformations in the left side of my face. It makes my eye red and my left cheek swollen. Um, and I acquired that at birth. There are also acquired differences, which can be things like scars or burns or blemishes, keloids, vitiligo. And then there's episodic, which are temporary or intermittent, um, which is like acne and styes that you get in your eye, hair loss from chemotherapy, and dermatitis. I should note that there is often crossover between categories. So you could maybe have an episodic difference that is also acquired or episodic that's congenital. There is quite a bit of crossover often. But at any point in the FD spectrum, it's important to keep in mind that it affects many, if not all, areas of our lives. So many of you know language matters. So I'm going to go over some terms that you'll commonly hear, and I'll kind of guide you through what is preferred. So generally, facial difference, this is a great neutral term that is preferred by most people. If you are guessing, facial difference is a good default. Craniofacial is a term that is used a lot by people in our community. You'll hear it a lot. It was coined by the medical industry, so it's mostly used in medical contexts, but you will hear the term craniofacial community. Many people, if you prescribe to the social model of disability, which we'll get to in a moment, are trying to get away from this term as it's a pretty medicalized term. But also note that it is still used commonly. Disfigurement is a very complicated word for our community. This is tricky. So it's used in legal contexts and medical contexts, and it is being reclaimed by some of us, just like queer is being reclaimed, disabled is being reclaimed, right? So there's a reclamation of it, but I would say that most or many people in our community still reject the term disfigurement. As for deformity, I would just stay away from this term always. I don't think it is accepted by anyone. I've never heard anyone say, this is my term. So just as a safe bet, maybe just steer away. But that said, I will say, and this is really like a good general rule for life, just always ask what people's preferences are. People might have a few terms that are okay, but just always ask. Our disability is really unique in that we have a social disability. And what that means is that we are disabled by social barriers. So that said, it should be noted that many people in our community have multiple disabilities, some of them due to the facial difference itself, hearing loss, vision loss, um, speech differences, and also like there are other multiple disabilities that have nothing to do with facial difference. So that's just to keep aware, but aesthetically, when we're talking about looking at someone's face, we have a social disability. There are many models of disability, though we're only going to talk about two of them today, and they're the two most used right now. Because facial difference is a disability, you'll notice throughout the webinar that many of the things we're teaching have crossover into the disability world as a whole, if you're familiar with disability culture at all. The medical model of disability says disabled equals less able. And that puts the onus of responsibility on the individual to overcome the challenges of their body minds. The social model flips that and it says we are disabled by society. So the onus of responsibility here squarely falls on the shoulders of society and its barriers and attitudes that bar us from participating fully. And I think the question comes up like, oh, well, don't you still have challenges? And sure, right, while our body minds may give us challenges, the fact of the matter is that we are mostly disabled because of society. There is a great debate in our community as to whether to identify as disabled or non-disabled. I will say that in this moment, I would say most people in our community do not identify as disabled. There are many reasons for that. Reasons why people may not choose to identify as disabled is because it might feel more stigmatizing if disability is understood through the medical model. Some people fear that they would take away resources and attention from people who are actually disabled, which is a difficult thing to discuss. That's a whole other conversation because we are actually disabled. Um, but this usually comes from a medical standpoint. Um, and then some people may just not know that facial difference is a social disability. Some reasons why people might identify as disabled might be to make sure that our protections are in place, or to maybe assert pride or belonging into the wider community. Um, I find that people who understand disability through the social model are more likely to identify as disabled, though not always. In 2022, About Face in Canada, which is an organization that serves people with facial difference, did a survey, and it was shown that like roughly a third of people identified as disabled. So less people than more. Being that we are an actual disability, I just want everyone to know that um, we are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So even though you might not, a person might not identify as disabled, you are protected. It gets a little bit complicated with how to disclose that to employers. But as peers and mental health professionals, just know that we are protected. Those protections are in place. Throughout this webinar, you'll hear us oscillate between, specifically me, maybe David and Felix too, but I oscillate between person first and identity first, and that means facially different person or person with a facial difference. So person first is person with a facial difference. I would say, if you are working with a peer, just ask what they prefer. This is another realm of people have real preferences for this. Some people don't care, but always good to ask. So now that we've set up that base foundation of terms, and I just threw a ton of information at you, I want to go into centering everyone in attendance in like our lived realities. And of course, we can't cover every lived experience, but we can certainly share our own stories. I want you to meet Hallie Elwell. I'm going to do something a bit unconventional. Being that I just threw a bunch of information at you, I just want to switch gears a little bit. Hallie is a friend of mine. She's a member of the facial difference community, also a member of the FaceOut project activism cohort. She's a singer-songwriter, a podcaster, and she'll be releasing her new podcast soon called Spontaneous Mutation. It's going to be fabulous. And she wrote her newest album, which hasn't been released yet, centers her facial difference, which is something that she's never done before. And she released a single called Dear Lucy, which is a letter to Lucy Grayley, who wrote the book Autobiography of a Face. Some of you may be familiar with this. It was a book that was really the first book about facial difference that made it huge, that I'm aware of. My colleagues may correct me on this. Greeley's memoir is raw. She writes openly about her struggles with mental health, and I thought that Hallie's song really captured that experience. I'm going to play the song. I would love for you to listen. If you want to follow, this video does not have any moving pictures. You're just going to see this screen the whole time. But if you want to follow along, feel free to turn on closed captioning so that you can enjoy. I'm just going to do a little bit of tech and then we'll hear the song.
Dear Lucy, I want to take you out for coffee. I want to chat about the world, about the pills they gave out like candy. I want to talk about mirrors and not recognizing your own face, about the whistles and the barks, pure will and nauseous grace. about kisses and sexuality. Learn something about disability. But maybe you wouldn't even know or think you were disabled. A lot has changed since you've been gone. A whole movement that includes us. If we want, if we want. We are miracles and adapters, great thinkers and inventors. If not beautiful, then certainly attractive. They can't keep their eyes off us after all. Dear Lucy, dear Lucy. And maybe the professor in you would scratch red lines through my words, tell me I got it all wrong. But mostly I'd like to tell you, you were my beginning. Sincerely, anomaly.
Hi, y'all. Good to see you. So I'm going to share a little bit about my experience, and we're all going to do that during this webinar. Mine is a pretty typical, in many ways, experience. I experienced comments and stares and questions. On top of it, though, I have kind of developed this game that I like to play because those of us with facial difference get a really keen sense of when someone is going to wind up and ask a question or say something rude. So I can tell this from a mile away. And so my game is called Racer Face. So my game is someone going to ask me today, where are you from? Or what happened to your face? And that's just my lived reality. It does, oh my goodness, balloons. Oh, exciting. I'm being celebrated for my game. Um, Growing up, I had a lot of career paths. I was in pre-med. I was studying pre-med in college. And what I landed on ultimately was a career that required me to wear spandex and dangle myself from the ceiling. So I became a circus artist. It's been my career for the past 15 years. Wild, right? So, um, and I have loved this career. I have loved it for so many reasons. It has taken me around the world. I've gotten to see things I never thought that I would be able to see. I get to perform with my husband, which is the most incredible experience of my life. Um, and in 2020, I put a hard stop to my career. I took a real hard pause and I said, I'm quitting. Actually, I said I was retiring, which was, I didn't know how to phrase it because I didn't know how to say I was quitting without saying I was quitting. Um, and what happened was I had gone through my career with this extreme feeling of always being a failure. So every time I went out on stage, I thought, I'm not good enough. I'm going to fail. I'm just going to mess it up so horribly and my career is going to end right here. And that was the anxiety that I carried with me into every single performance. And what I didn't realize is that at the very beginning of my career, I had these experiences that would color the rest of my 15 years. And those experiences included being dropped from a tour. But the very first thing that I was offered, the very first job that I was offered was a tour of the UK. And the offer was made to me verbally and then later taken away because the boss of that circus was so afraid about what would happen when the cast of performers interacted with the audience later at the end of the show. So I lost an entire year's worth of work because of stigma. Other instances were being asked to cover my face, or even worse, having costume. There was one costumer who tried to cover my face without telling me anything, without saying a word, and act like it was not obvious what she was trying to do, when none of the other showgirls were being covered. So these stayed with me. And what that did was it landed me in a place where I finally realized I need therapy. I need therapy to work through some of this past trauma. And I have been through a lot of therapists so far. And one of the last ones I went to was an EMDR therapist. And I went to her, and in our intake, what she said was, "Oh, I have a friend with a facial difference." I was like, "Oh, she understands. This is so exciting." And she said, she had a couple of surgeries, and oh my gosh, they were so bad. The results were so bad. The doctors should have done so much more. I can't believe it. And I immediately overrode all of my Japanese tendencies to keep the peace. And I ended the interaction right there. I just said, "Thank you so much. This is not, we are not continuing." Actually, I don't think I said thank you, but I just said, like, "Hey, we're not going to continue the session." And I pulled it down. And so that experience to me speaks volumes, because I know many people don't have that kind of experience. But I want to relay another experience that happened to my friend Jenny. Um, Her therapist questioned whether people were really staring at her face. They made her recount instances of being bullied to prove her lived experience, which brought up trauma, and then said those experiences were from childhood. So she couldn't prove that people were saying those things to her. And now, in everyday interactions, these rude questions, stares, and comments, people didn't have bad intentions. They don't really mean it. And that she was distorting reality now based on her childhood experiences, which was completely invalidating. And unfortunately, Jenny's experience is so very common in our community. Um, and so it paints a picture of like why we need to do these webinars, and to teach about how to be culturally competent about this relatively unknown community. I'm going to pass it to Felix. Felix, if you want to unmute, and he's going to tell you a little bit about his journey, and then start our next section.
Awesome. Hello all. Again, my name is Felix. I didn't do my description earlier. I am a Afro-Dominican. I have a light caramel skin complexion, short curly hair, uh kind of a goatee, and a light beard, I guess, and I have some gauges on. And yeah, I'm wearing a white shirt with white collared shirt with green leaves. Okay, awesome. With that being said, so yes, I am a peer professional, a certified peer, and also a psychiatric survivor. Meaning that for me, I experienced the mental health system in a way that I chose to kind of check out of it. Right. For me, I think that I've had multiple therapists who never even cared to prove that they were culturally competent enough to know how to address any kind of difference, let alone any histories of abuse, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and so forth. I like to think that I live within a microcosm, within a microcosm, within a microcosm, and into infinity, right? Of different kind of marginalizations that I've been a part of, and as such, it wasn't until recently where I found a therapist who actually kind of looked at it like, hey, I think that you're just super sensitive because you're in tune with your emotions on a like a very, on every level possible, macro and micro, and also that from a framework of collective liberation, like everyone kind of didn't choose to honor your dignity at the front and center, right? And also besides mental health diagnoses which were thrown out like candy to me, no one ever tried to address anything around like, hey, societal stigma and so forth, and also like perhaps maybe I might be on the spectrum, right? I think that a lot of times there's a default to a diagnosis of mental health condition as opposed to looking at neurodivergence also simultaneously. And for me, that's how I came to agree that let me look into that, right? Let me lean into that. And lo and behold, at 39 years old, I got a diagnosis of of autism spectrum disorder and ADHD. And that's when I unpacked everything and decided that for me, unless a therapist actually honors me and centers me and is willing to learn about the communities that I'm a part of and keeps it on a framework of social justice, then I can engage. I don't want to be a file. I don't want to be part of the medical industrial complex as a perpetual kind of consumer, right? Unless I'm being honored and my dignity is being upheld, right? And with that being said, I've been I've been diagnosed with all manner of SMIs, right? Bipolar, 1, 2, NOS, schizoaffective, schizophrenia. And then at one time when I challenged someone, they said BPD, borderline personality disorder, and I think that on a very practical level. One shouldn't be going by the previous person's diagnosis and the previous paperwork. It should be new interaction, new biopsychosocial, new history. Let's start with that, right? And with that being said, I just want to point out that that our lives are really kind of people affected with facial differences. Our lives really are not centered in a healthy way in community and media and such. So to go to a mental health professional and then kind of be further invalidated or minimized or diminished our lived experience, it kind of, for me, it puts me at odds with believing that like anyone can truly care, right? With that being said, perfect segue into gaps in care. Awesome. So yes, so facial difference is frequently misunderstood from a mental health perspective. Oh, yes. Thank you. As practitioners may not understand how others treat facially different people or hold stigma against us, which can contribute to things like paranoia, hypervigilance, persecutory beliefs, and believing that the world is against you, or that's a real thing. If you appear different in any manner, if when you enter into a room, you can hear conversation happening in the room, and then you walk in, and then it stops and there's no continuation. But if you walk out, then like there's more continuation of conversation, right? Or like going to place of employment, right? And being told that there is no opportunities are available, but yet the sign is still there. Or being the brunt of jokes. And we're supposed to either have thick skin or other things, or like they didn't mean that, or gaslighting in that nature, and it's just really not cool, right? And then so when we go to I as a peer, I didn't develop thick skin until recently when I decided that for myself, like I could not handle being treated like what I'm saying is not the truth, right? That my lived experience is not also the truth happening in reality. So when we talk about lived realities, we have to also honor that what one is experiencing is the truth for them, and it can also be the truth as well uh, in proximity and in parallel to others. And for people to choose not to agree with that, then it negates, a person's dignity. That's how I see it. And when we talk about lack of and going into lack of access to healthcare, it can compound mental health challenges again because, if there is a lack of culturally competent professionals to address things address the BIPOC community as a whole and social justice related issues and racism and so forth, then imagine the very nuanced, very, 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 very limited exposure to learning about like how to address facial differences in a academic setting, and therein like what happens after a person graduates, right? Like, is there further like cultural competency to do workshops and such? And when we talk about like mental health challenges, we talk about like for me, that is CPTSD, right? For me, that means I was the brunt of a lot of trauma, a lot of violence, gang violence, violence in institutional settings. And there's a lot of overlap when doing the research around several different SMIs, including generalized anxiety disorder, autism spectrum disorder, in conjunction with that, where it could be a toss-up between any diagnosis, right? And when we look at that, again, that's my reality. That's what I choose to honor myself and also say, hey, like I don't think that I agree with what you're saying is for me, and I don't have to agree going forward. So, just as Sora said, she fired her a mental health professional. So did I, right? And with that being said, because surgeries sometimes also are connected to mental health treatment, and sometimes people are gate kept further from if they want to choose to have surgeries that might correct might that will help them to achieve the quality of life that they want for themselves and correcting anything that they might perceive to be, different that they want to address. And when we talk about surgery, surgery is not right for everyone, right? That includes like does someone want to be removed from their communities, from the community, from school, from work, from access to family and friends for any kind of indefinite possible period of time to get surgeries done? And what do we want to go under anesthesia? It's a tricky situation, right? I know for me, when I was having surgery on my left eye, which they widened out, that's why I have a scar on my left eye. They didn't tell me that I could possibly go blind, right? And to correct any further kind of perceived like slight you know, uh, I'll say the colloquial term, lazy eye, or, to possibly fix to address that would possibly even also make me blind. So like what do I want to do? Do I want to have surgeries that are just like, chancing things, or do I want to move forward with my life and honor myself and my potential? Many folks who want or need surgery find that, these procedures are not covered by insurance. These are deemed elective, these are deemed corrective, therefore elective, therefore not medically necessary. So it takes fierce advocacy from a collective of professionals, and if mental health professionals are not on board for that, that would be the most important folks to kind of prove like, hey, this might not be, you know, PTSD, anxiety, or so forth. That can actually create medical necessity, right? And when we are talking about surgeries, surgeries can contribute to health because it doesn't address that social stigma is what disables us, right? And when we talk about social stigma, we talk about everyone during COVID was scared to walk out the house, right? Scared to engage because of the fear of possibly contracting COVID, or actually spreading it as well, because folks are immunocompromised. And in that regard, we all kind of turned into hermits, and we went to Zoom, and we learned about the reasonable accommodation that is Zoom, for accessibility reasons for everyone. It's amazing what Zoom has done for everyone in giving access to information, even to this workshop. There is legislation that was actually put into practice. That was promoted a few years ago that kind of died down, called the Ensuring Lasting Smiles Act, abbreviated by ELSA. It would require all private insurance group and individual healthcare plans to cover medically necessary services resulting from congenital abnormalities, facial differences, and so forth. That coverage would include any services and procedures for any missing or abnormal body part necessary to achieve normal body functioning, including teeth. By focusing on procedures to improve body function, ELSA won't include coverage for cosmetic surgery to reshape normal structure of the body in order to improve appearance. So only if it's actually deemed to actually impact social mobility. When we talk about lack of access to culturally competent care, just to circle back on that, when we talk about that, we're here because of that, right? We're all peers. We're peers and mental health professionals and general people in community, right? The larger community, inclusive of all. Like imagine going to see someone for help and they don't know how to help you. Like, is it an opportunity to teach someone how to help you, or should that person also be taking initiative to learn on their own and collaborating with you in that process? Or like, what if someone doesn't know that, like the professional like going to see is not well versed in everything that they might need, and they might not be offered a choice of like therapeutic interventions, right? Like EMDR, neurofeedback, or looking at other avenues, being taught about EFT, emotional freedom tapping techniques, and so forth. And it's really challenging to go to someone to try to get help, and they might not know how to help you to the best of your ability or your capacity, because they might not know how to. And when we talk about lack of culturally competent care, we also have to address like body dysmorphia, right? That's not talked about in therapy a lot, unless a person has an overt like eating disorder. We talk about body dysmorphia. It could be anything, right? Whether perceived, factual, or not. Some people avoid mirrors, right? Some people shy away from accepting compliments around their body or their gender and so forth because again, it might be disempowering or it might come off as not rooted in being genuine. And even furthermore, when we talk about body dysmorphia, uh, you know, we have to recognize that male identifying persons, men and trans masc men and non-binary folks as well, also experience body dysmorphia, which is just so like so not talked about, right? I think that again, like they say that men are supposed to be, burly and strong and muscular and all that, but like, look, I have a little muscle, and it works for me, right? And so yeah, when we talk about culturally competent care, we need to include folks that look like us, facially different folks, and also include like conversations with peers and mental health professionals and the general community so that we can all come to agreement that that we are all a community together, and community is inclusive of all. And with that being said, I thank you and I turn it back to Sora to facilitate the next section.
Felix, thank you so much. Yes, all of that. So we're going to jump to the next slide. Historical stigma and media. All right, so y'all, this is a doozy, so buckle up. Stigma against visible difference is so baked into our psyche, into our society, when really it's just a natural part of the human experience. That goes for all of disability, but you would not know it from Hollywood. So here's the thing, because it's so baked in, we don't even know where it comes from anymore. Unless it's been pointed out, people don't know that they have a knee-jerk reaction to visible difference. We don't know why we arbitrarily believe that visible difference is bad. We don't know why, but we just react in that way. But there is definite historical context, and it still holds a lot of influence today. So I'm going to give you a little history lesson. I don't know if you're familiar with physiognomy. Not many people are. Physiognomy was a pseudoscience that arose out of a number of different countries at different periods in time separately. But the first formal systemic discourse on physiognomy was developed by Aristotle. Okay, y'all, I just have to point out that this is the same dude that invented the scientific method. And somehow he forgot to apply that method to his pseudoscience, which has been debunked since then. It's so wild to me. Um, but anyways, the basic belief is that a person's character can be determined by their facial features. In Aristotle's discourse, he believed that features determine things such as physical strength and intelligence and morality. Um, and while many of us logically know that's not true, we somehow can't shake that bias. The beautiful equals good bias, the beauty bias, and the anomalous equals bad bias are ever present in our culture, and especially because we live in such a looks-based culture over here. On an everyday level, you can hear the influences of physiognomy. So let me throw this at you. Are you familiar with the terms dumb blonde or low or highbrow or beady eyes? Have you ever used these terms to describe anything, anyone? Um, it is really baked in and we just don't see it. It's like that with ableist language in general. Um, So media now has such an influence on how we think and act. And Hollywood is the biggest perpetrator of physiognomy. Typically, beautiful equals good, um, disfigured equals bad or pathetic. We are so often portrayed as villains or pathetic humans in need of help, or as inspirational, but never as the love interest or the hero. I wouldn't say never, but very, very, very rarely. the love interest or the hero or just the everyday person living their lives, we are historically almost always played by non-facially different actors. And hopefully there is some change happening in that area. But look, this is what Hollywood representation looks like. You may be familiar with some of these characters on the slide. You have Silas from the Da Vinci Code, the recent Netflix feature called The Mother. That's Adrian from The Mother, Darth Vader from Star Wars, Dr. Poison from Wonder Woman, Scar, who is literally named after his difference, and Lord Voldemort from Harry Potter. And these are just ubiquitous. I would argue that physiognomy and media representation are the foundation of all the stigma that we experience today. So, how does this all weave in together? There are different levels of stigma, according to Irving Goffman, who was arguably the world's first scholar of stigma. He laid out that there's intrapersonal stigma. That means that's internalized. It's also called internalized ableism, right? It's the beliefs that we hold about ourselves that are stigmatizing, that society has fed to us. There's interpersonal, right, which is unwanted attention. We don't get invisibility cloaks like the rest of y'all, if you're not different in any way, visibly different in any way. So we don't get to go and be anonymous in public because we're always like giant neon walking signs. And then there's structural, right? And so these are policies and practices that are put in place that treat us unfairly and perpetuate stigma. It looks like not being able to get a job or being put in the back room where nobody can see us. Our challenges are very unique. The face is both a biological organ and an organ of identity. It's our main way that we form our self-concept. Also, it's the primary means through which humans recognize and interact with each other, how we express ourselves and our emotions and how we like engage in social interaction. And for something so very arbitrary as appearance, we experience high rates of microaggressions, verbal and physical abuse, both from family members and non-family members, abandonment, kids ending up in foster care, and exclusion, just widespread societal exclusion, which lead to high rates of mental health challenges and suicide. So again, this is why culturally competent mental health care is so crucial. I'm going to pass it back over to Felix now, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more about intersectional stigma.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I just want to point out that the slide that's currently on the screen, that persons with facial differences have a higher than normal rate of mental health challenges and suicide. That is the completion of it, but also the ideation. I just wanted to point that out. I as someone with consistent, persistent kind of ideation as a result of, the lived experience of such. And next slide, Sarah. Yes. Yes, thank you, thank you. So, we can't address intersectional stigma without addressing the historical root of the word intersectionality, right? So Professor Kimberly Crenshaw actually coined the term intersectionality 36 years ago, when she actually wrote a paper to help explain the oppression of African American women. At that point in time, Professor Crenshaw's then somewhat academic term is currently now at the forefront of national conversations around racial justice, identity politics, and policing which has over the years helped shape legal discussions. So when we talk about intersectional stigma, as it relates to even furthermore at the when it comes to marginalization, the hyper marginalization, right? For me personally, I'm a person who is also just as impacted, right? So in that regard, everything at the intersectionality of that, poverty, institutionalization, over medicalization, over hospitalization, and also just, over policing at that. To touch base on that, I just wanted to give a little context on that before I actually continue going forward. How does intersectionality or other aspects of identity intersect with? Did I lose you? My apologies. My computer, my laptop, kind of. I hope I was on screen. Yeah. So, how do aspects of identity intersect with facial difference to create a unique experience of discrimination? Right. So, I couldn't find a job. Right. When I after high school. So in that regard, like, what did I do? I had a settlement that I won, and I used that money to kind of travel and get involved in music and kind of experience things. And then when I tried to go back into the workforce, I couldn't find work. Right, those entry level jobs like fast food, waitering, hosting, retail. Those jobs that are direct service, forward facing. Right, people have kind of gate kept a lot of upward social mobility from me. And as a result of that, I kind of found myself on the cusp of, negative lifestyles of, that saw me getting incarcerated. But again, like for me, that is poverty, right? That is, growing up in abject poverty, growing up in inner city, New York City, Brooklyn, New York, and, kind of having very limited options for, engaging other than kind of like, like literally toiling and going through moment to moment, kind of like suffering. And, maybe I just needed a break and I needed to find myself, right? Maybe I needed to learn how to love myself, which no one teaches you. And persons with facial difference have a bit more complicated understanding of that and require a bit more. Might require a bit more kind of deeper connection and learning how to do so even more so. When we talk about disparities, right? Class disparity, wealth disparity, access to information, right? Like we wouldn't be having this webinar would only be limited to who might actually be able to be in person in the United States somewhere if it wasn't for the internet, right? If it wasn't for Zoom making it international and possibly even like universal, right? And that's a real thing, right? The COVID pandemic actually brought so much focus on reasonable accommodations for access to information, access to resources, and so forth. And that's a beautiful thing because now everyone understands that, hey, like working from home, like that's a reasonable accommodation, right? Like that should be available to anyone thereafter, because that is an accessibility, that is a disability accommodation that everyone could benefit from. And when we talk about stigma, we have to talk about immediate perceptions, right? Whether they might be fed by implicit bias. As I've heard some really unhealthy things thrown my way, right? Like where people will kind of question my cognitive like like affect or my emotional affect or even like just kind of talk to me very in an infantilizing way, kind of judging me before speaking to me. It was more so happened prior to the last 12 years where I had some more kind of surgeries to be a bit more symmetrical. But yeah, like, people question my competence, right? They'll question race, they'll question gender, they'll question everything possible that, someone might still be trying to understand for themselves. And who is someone else to kind of throw their personal throw their personal opinion about you onto you and denying your dignity, right? That is just, when we talk about, facial difference community, we have to talk about, human rights violations. We have to talk about, civil rights violations, employment law. We have to talk about everything because at the end of the day, like, sometimes the only thing people have to go by first impression is your appearance, and sometimes people can be cruel, and that's just, that's not a healthy way to engage. Where you never know where a person his journey has brought them through, and to remove their dignity from them in that moment and possibly in perpetuity. So when we talk about intersectionality, we talk about the difference between each of us here on the cohort doing this webinar being able to speak for our communities, And yeah, and that's kudos to everyone being here present for the webinar. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it back to facilitation. Yes.
Thank you so much, Felix. I am now going to hand the floor over to David. You're in for a treat.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't know where to go now. It feels like the seminar is done, and I tend to think I should wait for the questions, given the time limitations here. But I'll tell a little bit about myself. My experience is kind of different. I had never benefited from a therapist. I did for a couple months, and this is over an 81-year lifetime. I was born with a vascular malformation on the left on my eye, and the doctor said it will go away. It didn't go away. At age 1 year, my lower face blossomed into what looked like, as my father said, a bunch of Concord grapes. The doctors were, I was born around Chicago, did not know what to do, so I was sent to the Mayo Clinic, and there my whole lower lip was cut off, and I got a lot of X-ray as radiation therapy. That at that time, this was 1945, that was a miracle cure, and the radiation was neither measured nor focused, so it kind of affected the whole left side of my face. And so this has been my whole life, and I was born into a very loving family. I went to a Catholic school where the nuns told me I was a child of God and that I had a soul, that I really was a soul. And so I was, treasured. Then at age 13, being an Irish Catholic from a large family, they thought I should become a priest. And back then they took you at age 13. I went to be interviewed by the priests at the Holy Cross Seminary at the University of Notre Dame, and the two priests who interviewed me told me that I was too ugly to become a priest. That was actually the most devastating thing that has ever happened to me in terms of an insult. I formed inside a core of anger, and yet I also am what is called counterphobic. The fears that I have, I push away. And I entered into life trying to follow my heart. I did different things, always trying to do good. I got involved politically, trying to change the world. Not around facial difference, but around the treatment of people who are impoverished or stigmatized, if you will, and particularly women with young children. In San Francisco, I helped to start the child care switchboard, on and on, did different things. And at one point in my 40s, I volunteered to be a massage therapist at a special new program at the Presbyterian Hospital in San Francisco, and this was during the days of the AIDS epidemic. I was part of a community of people that touched each other, and there I was touched by Marlena, my soulmate. That changed my life. Soon after, I got on stage. And here's the crux of the matter. I soon learned that people were interested in my face, and I was like the first person to get on stage with a facial difference all by myself. Why did I do that? How could I do that? Kids in school asked me that a lot, and I think it was because I am counterphobic. However, I continued doing this, started to make a living at it. I found that people would tell me, David, you're fantastic. You did a great job. And I always thought, well, they're just being nice to the little disfigured guy. It took me years to realize they were serious and giving me compliments that were deserved. And then I realized something else, that what I started doing when I start a show, I walk out on stage, I have me, the mic, a chair, flowers, water, a table. That's it. I'm all by myself out there. And what I do is I pause, I look at the audience, and I say, when I count to three, I want you all to ask, what happened to your face? 1, 2, 3, I point, and they all do it. And that's locking in the audience, because Francis Cook McGregor, back in the 1950s, said, the face is the locus of the human persona. And that was the core insight, I think, for this seminar. Anyway, I tell about my face, and people love it. And what they love, it's a key to the value of facial difference, to the power of facial difference, is everybody feels disfigured. And capitalism, in order for rich people to get richer, they stigmatize everybody. People would constantly come up to me and say, like, I had a wart when I was 13, and it's, I had freckles, and we're all disfigured. We all judge ourselves, even if it's something apparently minor. This is not to take away the stigma of marked facial difference. It's still there, but it's not just people being cruel and caustic and nasty and evil. Sometimes they're just curious. Well, except for teenage boys on drugs or alcohol, they are nasty and evil. And also, just to complete this thought, 4 and 5-year-olds are at the age when they're tuned into monsters. So it's not uncommon for me to see a 4 and 5-year-old peek out from behind his mother's dress and start crying and be freaked out by my appearance. Anyway, that's by the by. So I have learned that I am not alone. I am honored to be part of the FaceOut cohort with Sora and with Felix. After all this time, after 33 years of being on stage and on film and all that kind of thing, this now is important work. What you're hearing today is right the crux of the matter. So my experience a little different. I don't think people are necessarily being evil, cruel. Sometimes they just ask. And I find that I survive and thrive in community. And and my soulmate, Marlena, whom I married. We've been together for 35 years. She counts too, okay? And so do you. Thank you very much. And I'm interested in the questions when we get to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Your perspective on life and your journey is so valuable. David is one of the eldest members of the facial difference community. He is one of our elders who we love, adore, respect, and he has dedicated over 40 years of his life to this work, which is incredible. Thank you, David. Now we get into the tools, right? How do we reduce our implicit bias? So all of you attending this webinar are taking a huge step in reducing implicit bias just by being here. And just in case you're not familiar with this term already, implicit bias is where we harbor attitudes towards or hold stereotypes of people without being conscious of these thoughts. If you're not already familiar, so some things to keep in mind for our community is many of us have healthy self-confidence and lead fulfilling lives and still struggle with mental health. So we are all like very complex and we all have our individual experiences. No two people are alike. We talked about this, that many of us are multiply disabled, so that's always good to keep in mind. And also, many members in our community can't show emotion in the same way that others do because of full or partial facial paralysis. And that does not mean that they don't experience the whole spectrum of emotions in the fullest. We have tools for reducing bias. There are ways to tackle this. One of the big ones is always assume competence. This is a general life rule. Just always assume that the person you're meeting is competent. Also, take a breath, slow down, be mindful. And it just means just making space for you and the human in front of you or that you're interacting with. Like we did in the beginning, try taking the perspective of your peer and do try to avoid phrases like, I don't see your difference or I think you're beautiful. This is not an always thing, but I don't see your difference is very much like saying I don't see race, right? It erases our experiences. The one where it's not quite so cut and dry is I think you're beautiful, right? Maybe you do, but also for many in our community, hearing that is actually very triggering. So you just have to kind of get to know your peer before offering compliments like this. We have tools. We have tools for working with peers. I am not a certified peer specialist. I have started my education in it, but I'm not certified yet. Felix may want to jump in on some of these, but I'm just going to kick it off. One, this is a tenet of peer support is exercise unconditional positive regard and healthy intentional curiosity. That means validating our lived experiences and listening and knowing that we're all individuals, right? And trying to understand our unique perspective of the world, even if it's not something you've experienced yourself. Make no assumptions. You don't know what someone's life is until you get to know them. So that's where the healthy curiosity comes from. Ask for consent. This was something that Felix brought up. Wait for a peer to bring up their visible difference. And when they do, or if they do, because they might not, ask, do you want to talk about it? And you will find that there are some people who don't want to talk about their difference. Refrain from talking about your looks or about looks, both yourself and others, because this could be really triggering. So making disparaging comments towards your looks or even, or complimentary towards others, a lot of this can be triggering. But again, feel out your peer. encouraging self-advocacy and boundary setting, right? So helping FD peers articulate their needs, like if, how, and when they want to educate others about facial difference by sharing information or their stories, and how to set boundaries in social or professional settings. Felix, do you want to take this one? Boundary setting skills. You had talked about role-playing scenarios with clients to practice responding to intrusive questions or insensitive comments. You could also like switch role playing, so facially different peers can teach you, the peer specialists, about how to respond to lived experiences by having your peer play the role of the CPS and have them ask you questions. And yes, Felix, there
Yes,
you
yes, yes. Yes. So, hi y'all again. So around boundary settings and role plays, right? Folks that are familiar with intentional peer support is a really great modality of peer-to-peer communication, intervention, and also just connection, right? It takes on the role of it's a I like to think of it as honoring others as you want to be honored, right? In conversation and connection and in community with peers, and it brings the capacity to like role play. How would you like an interaction to go, right? And how would you change things about how you want to interact with medical professionals thereafter, and also just like hey, like. Like let's work through something so I can arrive at a better understanding, or let's just have a conversation. Emotional CPR helps as well. And I just wanted to go back to something about asking for consent. Because again, like also do know that some folks with facial differences don't know sometimes whether that might be a conversation to be had. Like they don't know whether they might never have had a conversation about it. So also kind of keep that in the back end. Like as a peer, you might want to, kind of also ask perhaps maybe they might have never had a opportunity to share. Yes, so around self-advocacy and boundary setting, there's just so much, right? As a peer, we are actually certified and licensed in our own states, right? So that means a tenet of that is cultural competency. So everyone here is actually learning about, people with facial differences, and as such, part of the role of peers is to actually empower and promote self-advocacy and how to protect oneself and safety and what does that look like in community. With that being said, right back to you, Sora.
Thank you so much, Felix. Valuable input. Thank you. The last one on the slide is promoting community connection, and activism. Many people are not connected to the wider facial difference community. I was not until I was in my mid 30s, right? So this is crucial, right? I met David, and David, this is only a few years ago, when I met David, he was the first person in my life that I had ever met with the same condition as me. And it was a full life experience where I just cried for so long, because I found someone like me. And it was so special and so sacred. So I very highly recommend trying to connect your peers to the community if they're not already. It's not for everyone. We understand that. But as far as mental health wise, for those of you who know who are part of other marginalized communities, being around people like you is sacred and an experience of connection and belonging. Also, activism could be great, but also just try to be encourage mindful activism, because while it could be really empowering to take your power back and try to make change, it could also lead to depression and anxiety. So just try to encourage mindful activism and to take breaks when needed or disengage when needed, because we all have to do that because we're in this for the long haul. So this is how you could be a great ally. The first one is to love yourself. And what that means is to work on your own internalized stigma when it comes to your own looks. Maybe the next time a pimple pops up, you'll be able to breathe a little easier and not be so afraid, and you'll be able to be more mindful of your experience with the world, going forward. Please be mindful to focus less on excuse me, on looks. I said work. Please be mindful to focus less on looks. Get more creative with both compliments and insults. And so I am not encouraging you to insult people, but I understand this is very much a part of the human experience. Um, so try to get imaginative while also not dunking on other marginalized identities in the process. So good luck with that. Raise our voices, amplify facially different voices, and invite us to the table. You could do that by letting us lead the public conversation, invite us into spaces so that our voices can be heard, and please be mindful not to speak for us or over us, just hand the mic to us. And then encourage others to do the same. So spread this message outwards by encouraging others to get involved in being allies. This is universal wisdom that can be applied liberally everywhere. So part of the work of the FaceOut Project is to move towards collective liberation, which means that no one is truly free until we're all free. In service to that movement, know that these lessons can be applied to anyone who struggles daily or intermittently with stigma of any kind, especially if it's appearance-based, but also it applies to the wider scope of disability, race, gender, religion, among other marginalized groups of people. So please take this out into the world in whatever way you feel that it could be helpful. And remember, be compassionate with yourself. Doing this work requires you to be compassionate with yourself. So we are not perfect, and that's called being human. When learning anything new, there's a learning curve, and we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. So learning and growing and taking time and just being in mindful community, just know that you're making a difference by showing up and learning. And if you do make a mistake, just apologize and move on, and that's okay. We're so happy you came here today to be in community with us and to learn with us. There will be a resource sheet that will be sent out after the webinar is finished. It'll be sent out with the recording. And please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to us individually through our bios. Our information is in our bios, or you can find any of us at the FaceOutProject.com, not the FaceOutProject.com. If you visit that website, and there's an online form that you could get in touch, and that will go to me, but I could get that message to David or Felix. So either directly through our bios or through the website is great. We have just a few minutes for questions, but first, Felix, will you close us out with a poem?
Hello, all. Thank you. So this poem is called "When Breathing is an Act of Resistance." It's sort of, when for me, when faith wasn't enough, and when faith wasn't available to me, and when hope wasn't available to me, when poetry wasn't available to me, when it was just surviving out of spite, and when just breathing, right, is an act of resistance in itself. When things all seem to, like kind of dark. So when breathing is an act of resistance. Breathing is an act of resistance, the life giver to revolutions coming and gone, the breath coursing through lungs promised not to another, the undertaker of nightmares and conduit for all achievements. When all seems still, understand while we breathe, we move, glide into the vacuum of space. Whether 10 toes planet firm or taking flight in dreams, where distance grows between truths being lived aloud, progress is made. As such, let us prepare. Let us prepare to fail, allow our fires to be reduced from overwhelming to diminishing to entirely overcome. We are gatekeepers. We are the love others seek for them. We are shipwrecks but still discoverable. We are poets with fortunes in our eyes, more than ever fathomable. We are our truths lived aloud. We are the communities we want, built for those to pitter-patter after us. We are the legacies we write to hold space for us in our absence. When all seems lost in gasping between cries, look for correction in the words of poets past and present to remind you how to breathe when you want to give up. Refuse to see yourself as nothing. At times to weather the storm, all to do is live. So live with the understanding that when all seems too dark to endure, breathing is an act of resistance. Thank you, Sora. Thank you all.
Oh, Felix. Oh, wow. What a powerful way to end. Um, if anyone has questions, oh my gosh, I just got teared up. Thank you, Felix. Uh, if anyone has questions, we're open. Any national empowerment folk, I know that we're getting near time. I'm happy to stay afterwards to answer questions if that's something that is allowed, or we can take questions and field them by email.
Does anyone have any questions? You can post them to the chat.
If you want to ask a question out loud, feel free to raise your hand. That's also acceptable. All right. Well, if there are no questions, feel free if you think of something. Oh, hey Jaden, go ahead and unmute.
Okay, sorry, wasn't allowing me at first. So I do a lot of disability advocacy things, and so I was really interested in this as well. I'm legally blind, so also apologies for me not raising my hand right away. But my question was more related to like resources and things. As a social worker, I want to make sure like I can pass on information to other clinicians that I work with, as well as for myself, right? I want to continue educating myself and ensuring that we're treating all people with dignity and respect, no matter who they are. And so I wasn't sure if that was something that was going to come out with this presentation or anything. And so I just wanted to ask that.
Thank you, Jaden. We have a very comprehensive list of resources that is going to be sent over by email. It includes everything from organizations that support people with facial difference. It also includes books, people to follow, and other random resources. I actually need to add artists onto there as well. If you're interested in finding Hallie Elwell, I'll put her information in there. Hallie was who we heard from earlier, her beautiful song. So that will be coming in the email afterwards. Thank you for your question, Jaden. I see a question in the chat. What can be done to teach children about their differences and handling their curiosity with respect? David, is that you want to answer that, or is that?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Thank you for asking that, Denise. Let me suggest there is a 24-minute video called Love at Second Sight, made by my wife and myself. We've done hundreds of presentations at schools. And the video, loveatsecondsight.org, is available for free on YouTube. And lots of teachers use it. They show it to kids and then have questions, and sometimes they invite us. And it's focused on like 12-year-olds, which is like the perfect target, because that's the point at which especially females start to feel that they're disfigured and shouldn't be even entering into puberty. Anyway, loveatsecondsight.org. Thank you.
Thank you, David. If you're in the chat, I just dropped the link. I also dropped the link to Hallie Elwell's site if you want to check out her music. Felix, I don't have your site on hand. Yes, please. Oh, hold on. I got you.
Thank you. My apologies all. Like, it's pretty loud in New York City, so yeah, that's why I'm going in and off mute. So I just wanted to say, yes, please do. There's some amazing TED Talks actually about facial differences and such. That are amazing to look at. Are amazing to look at. There's many of them. And there's also There's also cleft coaches actually as well, cleft life coaches, and also an amazing activist in Eva Ballou, who's actually got an amazing TED Talk, and she's actually a confidence coach, I believe. And she's got content out there, but definitely just encourage, healthy, positive, body positivity, which should include also facial differences, visible differences as well, and just let's be not just person centered, but compassion centered in all aspects of our lives, so that that kind of shines through in connections, and therefore, like, kind of like pay it forward with that. I just want to before we leave, I just want to make a comment. So I just want to close out at the end with that comment. So everyone, please ask questions.
Thank you. I'll throw it back to you, Felix.
Oh,
Colleen Wheatley, who is a member of the facial difference community in Canada, who is super powerful, um, just dropped a link to About Face in Canada. It is a specifically Canadian organization, but they have great resources on their website. That organization is included in our resource list. So if you lose the chat after this, don't worry, you can still find it. Also, Colleen, shout out to Colleen for providing the video social model of disability, and that will also be the in the resources. It's a great video. I encourage you all to look at it. So can we send, someone is asking if we could send a copy of the chat. I don't actually know how to do that. But maybe someone from NEC might be able to do that.
I'll see if I can figure it out.
Okay. Thank you, Mo. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments? And if not, again, if you think of questions later, just feel free to email either the National Empowerment Center and they'll pass it on to us, or reach out to us individually. I personally am so honored that we got to be here with all of you, and we carry Sandy as an ancestor with us today. She is always with us. She's always in my head. She is always telling me, like, go, build bridges, go. Sandy was not one for holding back. And I carry that spirit with me. I just have her in my heart all the time, being like, no, you just get in there. You just go do it, right? And uh, you know, we carry that with her ferociousness, her ferocious spirit. So, Sandy, we love you wherever you are. Thank you for being with us always in our hearts and through our work. And Felix, I'm going to ask you to unmute so that you can leave a comment.
I just wanted to say thank you all for taking interest in our community. Just thank you for doing so. Because again, like there's not a lot of healthy narratives or representation, and representation matters very much so. And I just want to thank Sora and David for continuing to support me over over this journey to get here, to be able to do this presentation. It wasn't easy. And just thank everyone watching this webinar, and in the community at large who will watch it offline and will even take the gems and nuggets and process and apply it in conversation and communication and connection to community. Just thank you all. But thank you, Sora and David. I'm really honored that I was able to do this presentation with y'all, and I miss Sandy, very much so. And thank you everyone else in the FaceOut project as well, and everyone in parallel and proximity. Therefore, thank you. I just wanted to like talk about and honor Sora and David, because they really just made things happen. Yes.
You make things happen too, Felix. You are powerful. You're so powerful. David, any closing thoughts?
I will just echo Felix, only I will change the names to Sarah and Felix.
Thank you all so much for coming today. David, love you. Felix, love you. National Empowerment Center, Kimberly, Mo, Oryx, Eugene. I see Jane Engelman on here also. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much. We adore you. Thank you for making space for us. And thank you everyone who came.